What happens when one of Britain's most respected actors sits down for what should be a friendly chat about his latest film, only to face a barrage of personal attacks and condescending remarks from a talk show host who clearly thinks she knows better? In just 34 seconds, Coleen Nolan would make one comment so outrageous, so completely out of line, that it would trigger one of the most shocking walkouts in daytime television history. Gary Oldman had arrived at the Loose Women studio that morning, expecting the usual promotional interview. He was there to talk about his new movie, maybe share a few behind-the-scenes stories, connect with the audience. What he got instead was something entirely different. The trouble started almost immediately after he took his seat on the famous purple sofa. The cameras were rolling, the audience was settled, and the panel was ready. Coleen Nolan sat in the center chair, flanked by Ruth Langsford, Janet Street Porter, and Kay Adams. Gary looked relaxed, professional, ready to charm the viewers with his usual wit and intelligence. "So Gary," Coleen began, leaning forward with that practiced television smile, "lovely to have you here. Now, before we talk about your film, I have to ask about something that's been bothering me." Gary raised an eyebrow, still smiling. "Oh, what's that then?" "Well, it's just that you've been quite critical of the film industry lately, haven't you? All this talk about how terrible Hollywood is, how actors are treated badly. But Gary, let's be honest here, you've made millions from that same industry. Isn't this all just a bit, well, hypocritical?" The other panelists shifted uncomfortably. Ruth Langsford glanced at her notes, clearly not expecting this line of questioning. Janet Street Porter looked genuinely surprised. Kay Adams simply stared. Gary's smile faded slightly, but he remained composed. "I wouldn't say hypocritical, Coleen. I think it's possible to be grateful for the opportunities I've had, while also acknowledging that there are serious problems in the industry that need addressing." "But Gary," Coleen pressed on, her voice taking on a patronizing tone, "you're sitting there in your expensive suit, probably drove here in a car worth more than most people's houses, talking about how hard done by actors are. Do you not see how that looks to ordinary working people?" Gary shifted in his seat. The audience was silent, sensing the tension building. "I think you're misunderstanding what I've been saying, Coleen. When I talk about problems in the industry, I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about creative integrity, about the way stories are told, about the responsibility we have as storytellers." "Oh, please," Coleen interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "Creative integrity? Gary, you were in the Batman films. You can't tell me that was about creative integrity." The other panelists looked increasingly uncomfortable. Ruth tried to interject. "Perhaps we should talk about Gary's new film." But Coleen wasn't finished. "No, Ruth, I think this is important. Gary, you've spent your career in big-budget blockbusters, making huge amounts of money, and now you want to lecture everyone about art? It just seems a bit rich, doesn't it?" Gary's jaw tightened. "Coleen, with respect, I think you're making some very unfair assumptions about my career and my motivations. The Batman films were excellent pieces of cinema, and I was proud to be part of them. But that doesn't mean I can't also care about other aspects of filmmaking." "But Gary," Coleen continued, her tone becoming more aggressive, "you've been in Hollywood for decades. You've been part of the system. You've benefited from it enormously. And now you want to bite the hand that fed you?" Janet Street Porter finally spoke up. "Coleen, I think Gary's just trying to." "No, Janet," Coleen cut her off. "I want to hear Gary explain this. Because frankly, Gary, it sounds like you're having your cake and eating it too. You want all the benefits of being a Hollywood star, but you also want to be seen as this serious artist who's above it all." Gary's hands clenched slightly on the arms of his chair. "That's not what I'm saying at all, Coleen. I've never claimed to be above anything. I've simply suggested that we can do better, that we can tell more meaningful stories, that we can treat people in the industry with more respect." "More respect?" Coleen's voice rose. "Gary, you've worked with some of the biggest directors in the world. You've won awards. You've been nominated for Oscars. What more respect do you want?" "It's not about me personally," Gary replied, his voice strained but still controlled. "It's about young actors starting out, about writers whose scripts get butchered, about crew members who work impossible hours for little pay." Coleen laughed, a harsh sound that cut through the studio. "Oh, so now you're the champion of the working class? That's rich, coming from someone who probably spends more on a single dinner than most people earn in a month." The audience was completely silent now. Ruth, Janet, and Kay all looked mortified. This was supposed to be a light entertainment show, not an interrogation. Gary took a deep breath. "Coleen, I don't think my personal finances are really relevant to this discussion. I came here to talk about my film, about the work I'm passionate about. I didn't come here to be attacked. Attacked? Coleen's eyes widened in mock surprise. Gary, I'm just asking you some honest questions. If you can't handle a bit of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't be giving interviews criticizing an industry that's made you wealthy beyond most people's dreams. That's not fair, Gary said quietly. That's not what I've been doing, and you know it. But Coleen was just getting started. The worst was yet to come. You know what, Gary? Coleen leaned back in her chair, a smug expression spreading across her face. I think the real problem here is that you've forgotten where you came from. You've been living in your Hollywood bubble for so long, you've lost touch with reality. Gary's eyes flashed. I beg your pardon? Well, it's true, isn't it? Coleen continued, clearly enjoying herself now. When did you last take the bus, Gary? When did you last worry about paying your electricity bill? You sit there talking about the struggles of ordinary people in the film industry, but you haven't been ordinary for decades. Ruth Langsford looked desperately at the producers off camera, clearly wanting this to end. Coleen, maybe we should. No, Ruth, let me finish, Coleen snapped. Gary, I've done my research. You live in a mansion in Los Angeles. You have multiple cars. You probably have staff. And you want us to believe you understand the struggles of working-class people? Gary's voice was dangerously quiet now. Coleen, my background is working class. I grew up in South London. My father left when I was 7. My mother raised 3 boys on her own. I know exactly what struggle looks like. But that was 40 years ago, Gary. Coleen shot back. What have you done lately? What have you actually done to help the people you claim to care about so much? That's not really something I feel the need to broadcast, Gary replied, his composure starting to crack. But since you're asking, I've quietly supported numerous charities, I've mentored young actors, I've used my position to try to make positive changes in the industry. Coleen rolled her eyes. Oh, quietly supported. How convenient. No publicity, no proof. Just your word that you're this great philanthropist. Janet Street Porter couldn't stay silent any longer. Coleen, this is getting a bit personal, don't you think? Personal? Coleen turned to Janet with a look of mock innocence. I'm just asking the questions our viewers want answered. Gary puts himself out there as this champion of the downtrodden, but where's the evidence? Kay Adams finally spoke up. I think Gary's been quite clear about his position. Perhaps we could talk about the new film now? But Coleen was on a roll. You know what really gets me, Gary? You talk about creative integrity, but you've made sequels. You've done franchises. You've taken the easy money just like everyone else. Gary's hands were trembling slightly now. There's nothing wrong with sequels or franchises, Coleen. Some of the best stories ever told have been part of larger narratives. The Dark Knight trilogy, for example, dealt with incredibly complex themes about justice, corruption, and moral ambiguity. Oh, please, Coleen scoffed. They're comic book movies, Gary. Let's not pretend they're Citizen Kane. And what's wrong with comic book movies? Gary's voice was rising now. Why can't popular entertainment also be art? Why can't stories that reach millions of people also have depth and meaning? Because they're made for 12-year-olds, Gary, Coleen said with a condescending laugh. They're about people in silly costumes punching each other. It's not exactly Shakespeare, is it? The other panelists looked horrified. Ruth was shaking her head. Janet was staring at Coleen in disbelief. Kay looked like she wanted to disappear. Gary stood up slightly in his chair. I'm sorry, but I find that attitude incredibly insulting. Not just to me, but to the millions of people who find meaning and inspiration in those stories. Who are you to decide what constitutes legitimate art? I'm someone who's been in television for 20 years, Coleen replied sharply. I know what real entertainment looks like, and it's not grown men running around in capes. Real entertainment? Gary's voice was incredulous. Coleen, with respect, this is a daytime talk show where you spend most of your time discussing celebrity gossip and personal relationships. I hardly think that gives you the authority to lecture anyone about artistic merit. The audience gasped. Coleen's face flushed red. How dare you? How dare I? What? Gary shot back. Point out the obvious? You've spent the last 10 minutes attacking my career, my character, and my motivations based on nothing but assumptions and prejudices. You've dismissed entire genres of storytelling as worthless. You've questioned my integrity and my authenticity. And when I defend myself, you act offended? Ruth tried desperately to regain control. Let's all just take a breath here. No, Ruth, Gary said, his voice getting louder. I'm tired of taking breaths. I came here to have a civilized conversation about my work. and instead, I've been subjected to a character assassination by someone who clearly decided what she thought about me before I even walked through the door. Coleen wasn't backing down. I decided nothing, Gary. I just asked you some hard questions, and you can't handle it because you're used to everyone kissing your backside in Hollywood. Hard questions? Gary was almost shouting now. These aren't hard questions, Coleen. These are attacks disguised as questions. There's a difference between journalism and harassment. Harassment? Coleen's voice rose to match his. Gary, you're on a talk show. This is what we do. We ask questions. If you can't handle that, maybe you shouldn't be here. You're absolutely right, Gary said, his voice suddenly cold and controlled again. Maybe I shouldn't be here, because this isn't a talk show, Coleen. This is a ambush, and I don't have to sit here and take it. Janet tried one last time to save the situation. Gary, please, let's just... But it was too late. Gary was already reaching for his microphone pack. The tension in the studio was unbearable. Everyone knew something terrible was about to happen, and then Coleen opened her mouth one last time. You know what your problem is, Gary? Coleen said, her voice dripping with venom. You think because you've got an Oscar nomination and a fancy accent, you're better than the rest of us. But at the end of the day, you're just another washed-up actor, desperate for relevance, lecturing people from your ivory tower about problems you haven't faced in 30 years. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operator stopped moving. Ruth Langsford's mouth fell open. Janet Street Porter looked physically ill. Kay Adams covered her face with her hands. Gary slowly turned to face Coleen directly. His voice, when he spoke, was barely above a whisper, but it carried across the entire studio like a thunderclap. What did you just say to me? Coleen, emboldened by what she mistook for weakness, pressed on. You heard me, Gary. Washed up. Desperate for relevance. Is that why you're really here? Because your career's not what it used to be, and you need to stay in the headlines somehow? Gary's face went completely white. He stood up slowly, his microphone pack still in his hand. In 30 years of doing interviews, he said, his voice shaking with controlled rage, I have never, ever been spoken to with such disrespect. What you just said is not journalism. It's not entertainment. It's cruelty, pure and simple. Oh, come on, Gary, Coleen said, but there was a note of uncertainty in her voice now. Don't be so dramatic. Dramatic? Gary's voice rose again. Coleen, you just called me washed up on national television. You questioned my relevance, my career, my character, and my motivations, based on nothing but your own prejudices and assumptions. And now you want to dismiss my entirely reasonable reaction as being dramatic? Ruth finally found her voice. Gary, please, let's just... No, Ruth. Gary cut her off, but his tone with her was gentle, respectful. I'm sorry, but no. I won't sit here and pretend this is acceptable. This isn't how you treat guests. This isn't how you treat human beings. He turned back to Coleen, who was now looking distinctly uncomfortable. You want to know about relevance, Coleen? Let me tell you about relevance. I've worked with Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, Francis Ford Coppola. I've brought complex characters to life for audiences around the world. I've spent decades honing my craft, pushing myself to grow as an artist and as a person. His voice was getting stronger now, more controlled, but no less intense. You want to know about giving back? I've mentored countless young actors. I've supported charities that help people get into the film industry. I've used my platform to speak up for people who don't have a voice. But I don't need to justify any of that to you. Coleen tried to interrupt. Gary, I think you're overreacting. Overreacting? Gary's eyes flashed with fury. Coleen, you've spent the last 15 minutes trying to tear me down for no reason other than your own entertainment. You've dismissed my work, questioned my integrity, and insulted my intelligence. And when I defend myself, you call it overreacting? He began unhooking his microphone. You know what? You're right about one thing. I am better than this, not because I have awards or money or fame, but because I treat people with basic human decency, because I don't attack people for sport, because I understand the difference between asking tough questions and being needlessly cruel. Janet Street Porter made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. Gary, we're all colleagues here. We're all in the same business. Gary looked at her with genuine sadness. Janet, with respect, we're not in the same business. I'm in the business of storytelling, of creating art, of trying to move people and make them think and feel. This, he gestured around the studio, this is something else entirely. He stood up fully now, his microphone pack in his hand. Coleen, I genuinely feel sorry for you. I don't know what happened in your life to make you think it's acceptable to treat people this way, but it's not. It's not professional. It's not entertaining, and it's not right." Coleen's face was bright red now. "You can't just walk out, Gary. We're live on television." Gary paused at the edge of the sofa area and turned back to face her one last time. "That's exactly why I can walk out, Coleen. Because we are live on television. Because there are people watching who deserve better than this. Because there are young people out there who might be thinking about careers and entertainment, and they need to see that this kind of behavior has consequences." He looked directly into the camera. "To anyone watching at home, I want you to know that this is not normal. This is not how professional people conduct themselves. You deserve to be treated with respect, whether you're a guest on a television show or just going about your daily life. Don't let anyone tell you that cruelty is entertainment." He turned back to the panel. "Ruth, Janet, Kay, I'm genuinely sorry you had to be part of this. You deserve better colleagues and a better working environment." And then, without another word, he walked off the set. The cameras followed him as he strode past the shocked crew members, past the stunned producers, and straight out of the studio. His footsteps echoed in the sudden silence. For a moment, nobody moved, nobody spoke. The four remaining panelists sat in complete shock, unsure how to react. The audience was silent. Even the crew seemed frozen. Finally, Ruth Langsford found her voice. "We'll be right back after this break," she said weakly, and the cameras cut away. But the damage was done. In 34 seconds, Coleen Nolan had destroyed not just an interview, but her own reputation. She had shown the world exactly what happens when entitlement and cruelty masquerade as entertainment. And Gary Oldman, with his dignity intact and his principles uncompromised, had walked away from it all, leaving behind one of the most shocking moments in daytime television history.